She needs to be in a nursing home today. My son's voice cut through our Thanksgiving dinner like a knife through my heart. The cranberry sauce I was passing slipped from my 79-year-old hands, splattering across the white tablecloth like blood. 23 family members, children, grandchildren, in laws, sat frozen around my dining room table, forks halfway to their mouths, watching the son I had sacrificed everything for deliver my death sentence. Andrew, what are you talking about? I whispered. But he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Sarah, his wife, who nodded like a puppet master pulling strings. Mom, you're forgetting things. Last week you left the stove on. You could have burned the house down. His voice was rehearsed, mechanical. Behind him, Sarah held up her phone. Recording. Recording my humiliation. For what? Evidence? The grandfather clock in the corner ticked louder than my heartbeat. My granddaughter Emma, only 16, stared at her plate. My nephew Robert cleared his throat and looked away. Not one person, not one, said a word in my defense. I am Eleanor Parker. I spent 35 years building computer systems that banks trusted with billions of dollars. I raised 2 children alone after cancer took my husband. I paid for Andrew's law degree, Sarah's dream wedding, helped with their mortgage when times got tough. But sitting there, watching my own family nod along to my son's lies while he recorded my breakdown, I realized something that would change everything. Sometimes the people who know you best are the ones best equipped to destroy you. And sometimes they forget who they're dealing with. You want to know what kind of woman they were messing with? Let me paint you a picture. In 1975, I hacked into IBM's mainframe system, legally, of course, to fix a bug that was stealing millions from their clients. I was 29 years old, one of only 3 women in Boston's tech scene, and I just saved a Fortune 500 company from bankruptcy. The CEO personally flew to Boston to shake my hand and ask one question. How the hell did you find what our entire team missed? Because, I told him, I don't trust anyone or anything until I've seen the code myself. That attitude saved companies millions. It also saved my family when cancer tried to take my husband David in 1982. While doctors gave us 6 months, I researched every experimental treatment, cross-referenced data, found clinical trials they hadn't mentioned. David lived 3 more years because I never accepted impossible. After he died, leaving me with 12-year-old Andrew and 8-year-old Susan, everyone expected me to break. Instead, I worked 3 jobs. Days at the bank debugging their security systems, nights freelancing for startups, weekends teaching computer classes. Andrew would fall asleep at my desk while I coded, and every morning he'd wake up with a blanket tucked around him and a hot breakfast waiting. Mom, you're like a superhero, he used to say. I put Andrew through Harvard Law. Every penny came from my hands. When he graduated, summa cum laude, he hugged me and whispered, I'm going to take care of you forever, Mom. You'll never want for anything. Then he met Sarah. Beautiful Sarah with her perfect smile and expensive taste. Their wedding cost $43,000. I know, because I paid for every flower, every champagne glass, every bite of that ridiculous 7-tier cake. When they needed a house down payment, I emptied my 401k. When Andrew's law practice struggled, I gave them $50,000 from selling David's vintage car collection. Each time, Sarah would hug me and say, You're the best mother-in-law in the world, Eleanor. We're so lucky. But something changed after they bought the Beacon Hill townhouse. The visits became inspections. Sarah would walk through my Cambridge home, the house I'd fought to keep after David died, touching my antiques, measuring rooms with her eyes like an appraiser. This kitchen is so outdated, Eleanor. And these stairs, aren't they getting dangerous for you? Andrew started talking about the future and planning ahead. He'd pull out his phone during dinner and show me glossy brochures for senior communities. Look how happy everyone looks, Mom. Wouldn't it be nice to have people your own age around? What he didn't know was that I'd installed security cameras after a break in 3 years ago. High definition, motion activated, cloud stored footage. Because once you've spent 40 years debugging systems, you learn to document everything. So when Sarah started bringing people through my house, friends who were actually real estate agents, I saw it all. When Andrew used his key to let contractors measure for renovations I never authorized, I recorded every second. When they sat in my living room calculating how much my furniture was worth, discussing which rooms would show better empty, I heard every word. The house was worth 1.2 million now. My pension and social security added up to 87,000 annually. In their minds, I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their retirement plan. But here's what they forgot about debugging. You don't just find the problem. You trace it back to its source. You document every error. You build an airtight case, and then you fix it permanently. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat in my study looking at months of surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and financial records showing exactly how they'd been planning to steal my life. 23 family members were coming for dinner tomorrow, and Andrew was going to make his move in front of all of them. He thought having witnesses would pressure me into compliance. He had no idea he was about to give me the biggest audience I'd ever need. Thanksgiving morning arrived like a storm I'd been tracking for months. I woke up at 5 a.m., old habit from 40 years of beating rush hour traffic, and began preparing what I knew would be my last family dinner in this house. 23 people were coming: Andrew and Sarah, my daughter Susan and her family from California, cousins, nephews, nieces, grandchildren. A perfect audience for whatever Andrew had planned. By 9 a.m., Sarah arrived early with grocery bags, playing the helpful daughter-in-law role to perfection. She bustled around my kitchen, rearranging everything I'd already prepared, commenting on how tired I looked and how overwhelming hosting must be for someone my age. You know, Eleanor, there are lovely assisted living places that handle all the cooking and cleaning. Wouldn't that be easier? I smiled and kept stirring gravy. I've been handling Thanksgiving for 50 years, dear. I think I can manage one more. What she didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded by the voice-activated system I'd installed last month. The same technology I'd helped develop for corporate security back in the 90s. Every casual suggestion about moving, every concern about my health, every calculating glance at my antiques was being documented in crystal clear audio. Andrew arrived at noon with a manila folder tucked under his arm. Legal documents, I was certain. He kissed my cheek like nothing had changed, but his eyes were already surveying the room, calculating square footage and renovation costs. Mom, we need to talk after dinner. It's important. Of course, sweetheart. Family first. The guests began arriving at 2 p.m. Susan hugged me tight and whispered, "You look wonderful, Mom. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She'd flown in from San Francisco specifically for today, and something in her expression told me Andrew had already been working on her too. My nephew Robert brought his wife and twin daughters. Emma, my youngest granddaughter, stayed close to my side all afternoon, sensing the tension that had settled over the house like fog. The children played in the living room, while adults made small talk in voices just a little too bright, a little too forced. By 4 p.m., everyone was seated around the dining room table I'd set with David's mother's china. The good stuff I only brought out for special occasions. The turkey was perfect, golden, and steaming. The cranberry sauce gleamed like rubies under the chandelier. Everything looked exactly as it should for a Norman Rockwell family gathering. That's when Andrew stood up. Before we say grace, I'd like to say something. His voice carried that lawyer's authority he'd perfected in courtrooms. Every conversation stopped. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward him. We're all here because Mom has brought us together every year, rain or shine, for as long as I can remember. She's been the cornerstone of our family. His voice caught perfectly. Practiced emotion. But I think we all know that times are changing. I felt the room shift. Susan's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sarah nodded encouragingly at her husband, playing her part. Mom's getting older. She's been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, missing appointments, repeating herself. Last week, she called me 3 times asking the same question. Lies, all lies, delivered with the confidence of a prosecutor closing his case. I've been researching some beautiful communities where Mom could be safer, happier, surrounded by people her age with medical staff on hand 24/7. He pulled out glossy brochures and spread them across the table like evidence. Places where she won't have to worry about maintaining this big house anymore. The silence stretched like a held breath. My granddaughter Emma looked between me and her uncle. Confusion and something that looked like betrayal flickering across her 16-year-old face. The thing is, Andrew continued, his voice growing stronger, we need to act quickly. These places have waiting lists, and Mom's condition could deteriorate rapidly. I've taken the liberty of getting her on several lists, but we need to make some decisions today, as a family. Sarah's phone was out again, recording everything. Evidence for their case, I realized. My emotional breakdown, my family's intervention, my eventual surrender, documented for whatever legal proceedings they had planned. Robert shifted in his seat. Andrew, don't you think this should be discussed privately with your mother first? We tried, Sarah interjected smoothly. Eleanor becomes very agitated when we bring it up. She's not thinking clearly about what's best for her. That's when I felt something I hadn't experienced in 40 years of corporate battles, cancer fights, and single motherhood. The moment when you realize you're completely surrounded, outmaneuvered, and outgunned. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that the best debuggers are the ones who let the system crash completely before they fix it. I set down my wine glass, my grandmother's crystal stemware that Sarah had been eyeing for months, and smiled at my son across the table loaded with food I'd prepared, in the house I'd fought to keep, surrounded by the family I'd sacrificed everything for. Well, I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room and every recording device they didn't know existed. Isn't this interesting? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Andrew's confident smile flickered like a candle in wind. He hadn't expected me to speak so calmly, so clearly. In his scenario, I was supposed to break down, cry, maybe even storm out, giving him the perfect footage of an unstable elderly woman. "Mom," he said, his lawyer voice slipping slightly, "I know this is hard to hear, but—" "Hard to hear?" I interrupted, still smiling. "Son, I spent 35 years in boardrooms where men twice your age tried to convince me I didn't understand technology. This is actually quite familiar." Sarah's recording hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Around the table, my family sat frozen, watching what they thought was going to be a gentle intervention turn into something else entirely. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," I continued, picking up each brochure and examining it like evidence. "Sunrise Senior Living, Atria, Golden Pond Retirement Community." I looked directly at Andrew. "Did you know the average cost of these places is $8,000 per month?" "Mom, we've looked into the financing." "Financing with what money, Andrew?" My voice was still pleasant, conversational, but something had shifted. The room felt it. "Because according to my calculations, you've borrowed approximately $200,000 from me over the past 15 years, none of which has been repaid." The cranberry sauce stain on the white tablecloth seemed to spread larger in the silence. Susan spoke first. $200,000. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh, yes." I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind I used to carry in meetings to track bugs and system errors. "Would you like me to itemize it? Harvard Law School expenses beyond scholarship, 43,000. Wedding costs, 43,000. House down payment, 85,000. Various emergency loans that somehow never got repaid, 37,000. Andrew's face had gone from confident to pale to flushed. "Mom, those weren't loans. Those were gifts. Family helping family." "Gifts?" I laughed. Actually laughed. "How interesting, because I have copies of every check, every bank transfer, every promissory note you signed, including the one from last Christmas when you needed money for Sarah's mother's medical bills." Sarah's phone clattered to the table. 23 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her, then at Andrew, then back at me. "Eleanor," Sarah said, her perfect composure finally cracking, "you're embarrassing yourself. This is exactly why Andrew is concerned about your mental state." "My mental state?" I stood up slowly, my 79-year-old bones cooperating beautifully for once. "Darling, let me tell you about my mental state. Last Tuesday, you brought 3 people through my house while I was supposedly napping. Real estate agents. One of them spent 20 minutes measuring my kitchen for renovation potential." The blood drained from Sarah's face. "Wednesday, Andrew used his key to let contractors walk through, pricing out what it would cost to flip this place for maximum market value. They discussed knocking out the wall between the living room and dining room. David built that wall with his own hands." My voice grew stronger with each revelation. Around the table, spoons rested forgotten in bowls of untouched food. "Thursday, you both sat in my living room after you thought I'd gone to bed, calculating property values and discussing which of my belongings you'd keep versus what you'd sell. Sarah, you particularly liked my mother's jewelry collection." Emma, my granddaughter, stared at her uncle with the kind of shocked disgust reserved for teenagers discovering adults are capable of true cruelty. Robert's wife had covered her mouth with her napkin. Susan looked like she might vomit. But My favorite conversation, I continued, my voice carrying the authority of 40 years spent commanding corporate meetings, was Friday night when you discussed having me declared mentally incompetent so you could get power of attorney without my consent. The words landed like grenades in the pristine dining room. Andrew shot to his feet. That's enough. You're proving my point right now. These paranoid delusions, these wild accusations. Delusions? I smiled and pulled my smartphone from my pocket. A smartphone that Andrew and Sarah had repeatedly suggested I was too old and confused to properly use. Would you like to hear the recordings? In that moment, watching 23 family members realize that everything they thought they knew about this dinner, about me, about Andrew and Sarah, was about to change forever. I understood something about power I'd never quite grasped in all my years of debugging corporate systems. Sometimes you have to let people think they're winning before you show them exactly how much they've lost. You want to hear recordings? Andrew's voice cracked like thin ice. Mom, you can't just record people without their consent. That's illegal in Massachusetts. I smiled wider. Actually, Andrew, Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for private conversations. But when you use my Wi-Fi network to research nursing homes on your laptop, when you bring strangers into my house without permission, when you discuss my assets in my living room, I paused for effect. Well, that changes things considerably. The smartphone in my hand had never felt more powerful. Around the table, Thanksgiving dinner was growing cold, but nobody moved. 23 people sat transfixed, watching a family implode in real time. You wouldn't, Sarah whispered. Wouldn't what, dear? Exercise my rights in my own home. I touched the phone screen, and suddenly, the room filled with Andrew's voice from 6 days ago. Has to be the dementia angle. If we can get her declared incompetent, we can sell the house and put her somewhere affordable. The equity alone is over $1 million. 2. The recording was crystal clear. My dining room's acoustics had always been excellent. Sarah's voice came next. But what if she fights it? Your mother isn't stupid, Andrew. She's 79 and isolated. Who's going to believe her over both of us? Especially when we have documentation of her incidents. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The same clock that had marked time through 40 years of family dinners, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Susan's chair scraped against hardwood as she pushed back from the table. Andrew. Her voice was barely controlled fury. What the hell is wrong with you? My son looked around the table like a trapped animal. These weren't strangers. These were aunts and uncles who'd changed his diapers, cousins who'd grown up with him, nieces and nephews who'd looked up to him. And now, they all knew exactly what kind of man he'd become. It's not what it sounds like, he started, but his voice carried no conviction. It sounds, said Robert, my nephew, who'd always been quiet and thoughtful, like you and your wife were planning to steal your mother's house and have her committed based on lies. Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, stood up abruptly. Her chair fell backward with a crash that made everyone jump. Uncle Andrew, I cannot believe you would do this to Grandma Eleanor. Her young voice shook with rage and disappointment. She paid for your college. She helped buy your house. And this is how you repay her. Emma, you don't understand. Andrew reached toward his niece. Don't touch me. She stepped back like he was contaminated. You're disgusting. You're both disgusting. The teenager's moral clarity cut through the room like a blade. If a 16-year-old could see the betrayal so clearly, what excuse did the adults have? Sarah tried damage control. Everyone's getting emotional. Eleanor, maybe we should discuss this privately. Privately? I laughed, and this time there was no warmth in it. Like you discussed my deteriorating mental state privately with my son? Like you privately researched which of my belongings would sell for the most money? I touched the phone screen again. This time, it was Sarah's voice. The jewelry alone is worth at least 50,000. And those antique chairs in the dining room? I saw identical ones on eBay for 3 grand each. Around my dining room table, sitting in those very antique chairs she'd been pricing, my family stared at Sarah like she'd grown horns. My cousin Martha, who'd driven 4 hours from Vermont, shook her head slowly. Sarah, honey, those chairs have been in Eleanor's family for 3 generations. I know that, Sarah snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. But Eleanor can't take them to a nursing home, can she? And there it was, the truth, ugly and naked, in the middle of my Thanksgiving table. 23 witnesses heard her reduce my life, my home, my memories to nothing more than dollar signs and square footage. In 40 years of corporate battles, I'd learned that the moment your opponent reveals their true nature is the moment you've already won. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, sacrificed for, believed in, and spoke the words that would change everything. Andrew, get out of my house. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Andrew's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that looked almost like relief, as if being caught had lifted a weight he didn't know he'd been carrying. But the relief lasted only seconds before the reality of 23 witnesses sank in. Mom, you're being ridiculous. We can work this out like adults. Adults? I stood up, my 79-year-old frame somehow feeling stronger than it had in years. Adults don't forge medical documents. Adults don't lie to their families. Adults don't treat their mothers like ATMs with heartbeats. Sarah grabbed Andrew's arm. We should go. She's clearly having an episode. That's when Emma, my granddaughter, did something that will stay with me forever. She walked around the table, stood beside my chair, and put her teenage hand on my shoulder. Grandma Eleanor isn't having an episode, she said, staring directly at Sarah. She's having a moment of clarity. The simple gesture, one 16-year-old choosing to stand with me when my own son had abandoned me, broke something loose in my chest. Not sadness, not anger, something much more powerful. Absolute, crystal clear certainty about what came next. Susan, I said to my daughter, who had been silent through the worst of it, I need you to witness something. I walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner, the one David had restored by hand, the one Sarah had been pricing online. From the locked drawer, I pulled out a manila folder. Not Andrew's folder of nursing home brochures, but mine, the one I'd been preparing for 6 months. What is that? Andrew asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected. Copies, I said simply, of everything. Bank records showing every loan you never repaid. Screenshots of your web searches for declaring elderly parent incompetent. Emails between you and Sarah discussing my deteriorating condition that, mysteriously, only exists when you need to justify your actions. I opened the folder and spread documents across the table like a winning poker hand. Property assessments you had done without my permission, contact information for estate sale companies, and my personal favorite, the draft power of attorney document you had prepared 6 months ago, backdated to make it look like I signed it willingly. The room was so quiet I could hear the heat kicking on in the basement. But wait, I continued, my voice carrying the authority of every corporate presentation I'd ever delivered. There's more. Because while you two were busy planning my cognitive decline, I was busy consulting with my old colleague Michael Reed. He's an elder law attorney now. Fascinating specialty. Andrew's face went ashen. Mom, Michael explained something very interesting about financial elder abuse. Apparently, when adult children systematically manipulate and defraud their parents, it's not just morally reprehensible, it's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. Each forged document, each fraudulent claim, each attempt to circumvent my autonomy is a separate crime. I picked up my phone again, but this time I didn't play a recording. Instead, I pulled up a contact and hit dial. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Michael, it's Eleanor. Yes, it's time. They're all here, just like we discussed. Around the table, my family watched in fascination as the woman they thought was a confused old lady orchestrated what was clearly a carefully planned legal strategy. Actually, I said into the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. It went exactly as you predicted. They recorded their own intervention, thinking they'd use it as evidence of my incompetence. They have no idea they just documented their own conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Andrew bolted for the door. We're leaving. This is insane. Oh, you're absolutely leaving, I agreed. And Andrew? Since you're so concerned about my mental state, I've arranged for a very thorough competency evaluation. Court appointed, completely independent. Should be interesting to see how that turns out. Sarah grabbed her purse. Her perfect composure finally shattered. Completely. Eleanor, you'll regret this. Without us, you have no one. I looked around my dining room, at Susan gripping her napkin with white knuckles, at Emma still standing protectively beside me, at Robert and Martha, and all the family members who'd witnessed this betrayal with their own eyes. Sarah, I said quietly, I just discovered I have more family than I thought. The front door slammed with a finality that echoed through 40 years of motherhood. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The silence that followed Andrew and Sarah's exit was different from the shocked quiet of their exposure. This was the hush of people processing what they'd witnessed. Not just a family fight, but the systematic dismantling of a conspiracy. Susan broke the silence first. Mom, how long have you known? Known? I sat back down, suddenly feeling every one of my 79 years. I suspected for months, but I've been building a case for the past 6 weeks. Emma squeezed my shoulder. Grandma, you're like a secret agent. Despite everything, I laughed. Sweetheart, when you've spent 40 years debugging corporate systems, you learn to document everything and trust nothing. Over the next 2 hours, as my family slowly resumed eating cold turkey and congealed gravy, I told them the whole story. How I'd noticed Sarah's calculating glances, how Andrew's visits had become inspections, how conversations always steered toward my limitations and their growing concerns. The security system was your idea, wasn't it? Robert asked. After the third time Sarah brought friends through to look at my house? Yes. High-definition cameras in every room except bedrooms and bathrooms. Cloud storage, motion activated. The same technology I helped banks use to catch internal fraud. Martha shook her head. Eleanor, how did you stay so calm? If someone was plotting against me like that, because anger makes you sloppy, I explained. Andrew's a lawyer. A good one, unfortunately. If I'd confronted him emotionally, he would have used it as evidence of my instability. But documentation, evidence, legal precedent, that's a language he understands. The next morning, while Boston was sleeping off its turkey hangovers, I was sitting in Michael Reed's law office in downtown Boston. Michael and I had worked together at Digital Systems Corporation in the 1980s before he went to law school. He specialized in elder law now, protecting seniors from exactly what Andrew and Sarah had attempted. Eleanor, I have to say, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen, Michael said, reviewing the files I'd compiled. Most victims of financial elder abuse don't realize what's happening until it's too late. Most victims aren't former systems analysts who spent 30 years being paranoid about data integrity. The court-appointed competency evaluation took place the following Wednesday. Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatrician with 40 years of experience, put me through 3 hours of cognitive testing, memory exercises, and psychological evaluation. Mrs. Parker, she said afterward, I'm going to be blunt. Your cognitive function is not just normal for your age. It's superior. Your memory, reasoning, and judgment are sharper than most people half your age. And my supposed dementia? Non-existent. Whoever suggested you were experiencing cognitive decline was either grossly incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. The following Monday, Michael filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Andrew and Sarah. Elder financial abuse, conspiracy to defraud, forgery, attempted theft. The documents we'd compiled painted a picture of systematic manipulation spanning months. But the real victory came 2 weeks later. I was having tea with Emma. She'd started visiting after school, drawn by what she called my secret badass energy, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Andrew standing on my porch, alone. He looked terrible, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, the kind of exhausted that comes from lawyers' meetings and sleepless nights spent calculating legal fees. Mom, he said when I opened the door, we need to talk. Do we? Because the last time you wanted to talk, it involved nursing home brochures and power of attorney documents. The lawsuit, he started, then stopped. Michael Reed is destroying us. Sarah's already talking about divorce. My law partners are discussing sabbatical options. I studied my son's face. This man I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for. The man who'd tried to steal my life while serving me Thanksgiving dinner. Andrew, I said quietly, what did you think would happen? You tried to convince my family I was losing my mind so you could steal my house. You recorded my supposed breakdown to use as evidence. You forged medical documents. I know, but there is no but. My voice carried the weight of every boardroom confrontation I'd ever won. You made your choice. You chose my money over my dignity. You chose Sarah's greed over your mother's well-being. You chose to treat me like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. He looked up at me with something that might have been hope. So, what happens now? Now? I smiled, and, for the first time in months, it reached my eyes. Now you find out what accountability looks like. 3 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my Cambridge home, the home Andrew and Sarah had tried to sell out from under me, making coffee for a visitor who would have surprised the old Eleanor. Dr. Patricia Williams, the geriatrician who'd conducted my competency evaluation, had become an unexpected friend. She was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing proposals for something we'd started calling the Eleanor Project. The Massachusetts Bar Association is very interested, she said, looking up from the paperwork. They want to use your case as a training model for elder law attorneys. I handed her a mug, not my grandmother's china, but the sturdy, everyday cups that David and I had collected over 40 years of marriage, the ones Sarah had deemed too ordinary to be worth stealing. It's strange, I mused, settling into my own chair. 6 months ago, I thought my life was winding down. Now I feel like I'm just getting started. The Eleanor Project had begun simply enough. Michael suggested I speak at a legal seminar about elder financial abuse from the victim's perspective. Word spread. Suddenly, I was getting calls from adult protective services, senior centers, law enforcement agencies. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How does a potential victim recognize the warning signs early enough to fight back? Emma burst through my back door without knocking, a privilege she'd earned by being the first person to stand with me when my own son had abandoned me. "Grandma Eleanor, you're never going to believe this," she said, waving her phone. "The Boston Globe article about your case has gone viral. It's been shared like 50,000 times." The article, titled "The 79-Year-Old IT Expert Who Debugged Her Own Family," had run the previous Sunday. The reporter had been fascinated by the intersection of technology and elder abuse, how my career had equipped me to document and expose Andrew and Sarah's conspiracy. "You're famous," Emma continued. "There are comments from people all over the country, sharing their own stories. Look at this one. A woman in Texas says her daughter tried the exact same scam, but reading your article gave her the courage to fight back." That afternoon, I walked through my house, really looked at it for the first time in months. The living room, where Sarah had brought real estate agents to measure for renovations. The dining room, where Andrew had tried to stage manage my surrender. The kitchen, where I'd prepared what I thought would be my last family dinner. Each room looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. This wasn't just my house anymore. It was my fortress, my headquarters, my proof that dignified resistance was possible. The phone rang constantly now. Seniors calling with questions about protecting themselves from financial abuse. Adult children who suspected their siblings of manipulating elderly parents. Lawyers seeking advice on technology-based evidence gathering. I'd become something I never expected at 79. A resource. Susan called every few days from San Francisco, still processing what she'd witnessed at Thanksgiving dinner. "Mom, I keep thinking about how calm you were, how prepared. It's like you turned into this completely different person." "No, sweetheart," I corrected her. "I turned back into who I always was. I just forgot for a while." The legal case was moving forward steadily. Andrew and Sarah had attempted to settle out of court twice, but Michael and I had declined. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about precedent. Other families needed to see that elder abuse had consequences. "The beauty of your case," Dr. Williams had explained during one of our coffee meetings, "is that it completely destroys the concerned family defense. No jury is going to believe that secretly bringing real estate agents through your mother's house is an act of love. Evening came earlier now that it was February, and I settled into David's old reading chair with a cup of tea and my laptop. Emails from across the country filled my inbox, seniors sharing their stories, adult children asking for advice, researchers requesting interviews. At 79, I'd accidentally become an advocate. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Grandma, there's a documentary producer who wants to interview you. Something about a film on elder abuse prevention? Should I tell him yes? I looked around my living room, at David's books still lining the shelves, at photos spanning 5 decades of family history, at the home I'd nearly lost to my son's greed. I typed back, tell him yes, but warn him. This isn't a sad story about a helpless old woman. This is a story about fighting back. At 79, I was just getting started. 6 months after the Thanksgiving, that changed everything. I stood in Suffolk County Superior Court, watching Judge Margaret Chen read the verdict that would define my legacy. In the matter of Parker versus Parker, the court finds the defendants guilty of elder financial abuse, conspiracy to defraud, and attempted theft by false pretenses. Andrew and Sarah sat at the defendant's table, their expensive lawyer unable to overcome the mountain of evidence I'd compiled. Audio recordings, video surveillance, financial documents, forged medical records, email trails. 40 years of IT experience had taught me that data doesn't lie. The defendants are hereby ordered to pay full restitution of $237,000 plus damages of $150,000. Additionally, Mr. Parker's law license is suspended for 18 months, and both defendants are ordered to perform 200 hours of community service with elder advocacy organizations. But the real victory wasn't the money or even Andrew's professional consequences. It was what Judge Chen said next. This case represents a particularly egregious example of elder abuse. Not just the financial fraud, but the psychological manipulation designed to make the victim question her own competency. Mrs. Eleanor Parker's methodical documentation and legal response should serve as a model for other seniors facing similar exploitation. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Michael Reed, my former IT colleague turned legal champion, shook his head in amazement. Eleanor, in 30 years of elder law, I've never seen a victim turn the tables so completely. They tried to use your age against you, and instead, you used your experience to destroy them. The documentary crew was waiting outside, cameras rolling as I emerged into the Boston Springs sunshine. The film, Debugging Elder Abuse, the Eleanor Parker story, had become a cause célèbre in legal and senior advocacy circles. Mrs. Parker, the reporter called out, what would you say to seniors who might be facing similar situations with their families? I paused on the courthouse steps, thinking of all the calls and emails I'd received over the past months. Seniors who recognized themselves in my story. Adult children horrified by their siblings' behavior. Families torn apart by greed disguised as concern. I'd say that age is not the same as helplessness, I answered. Experience is not the same as irrelevance. And family relationships built on exploitation are not relationships worth preserving. That evening, I hosted what had become a monthly tradition. Dinner for my real family. Susan had flown in from San Francisco. Emma brought her boyfriend, a sweet kid who was fascinated by what he called my revenge tech skills. Robert and Martha came with their spouses and children. Michael joined us, as had Doctor. Williams, and several neighbors who'd supported me through the legal battle. 23 people had witnessed my humiliation at that Thanksgiving table. Tonight, 15 people celebrated my vindication around the same dining room table, eating from the same antique plates Sarah had tried to price for resale. Grandma Eleanor, Emma said, raising her glass of sparkling cider. I want to make a toast to the woman who taught us that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt David's presence in the room. Not as grief or loss, but as continuity. This house, this table, these relationships built on genuine care rather than calculated gain. This was what we'd built together, what I'd nearly lost, what I'd fought to keep. My phone buzzed with a text message. Andrew, the first communication I'd received from him since the verdict. Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that losing you was worse than any legal consequence. I'm getting help. Individual therapy, financial counseling. I know it's too late, but I need to become someone worthy of the mother who raised me. I showed the message to Susan, who read it with tears in her eyes. What are you going to do? I looked around the table at Emma, laughing with her boyfriend, at Michael deep in conversation with Dr. Williams about their next legal education project, at the family that had formed around shared values rather than shared DNA. I'm going to keep living my life, I said. Some relationships can be debugged and restored. Others need to be deleted from the system entirely. The hard part is knowing which is which. Emma squeezed my hand. And if Uncle Andrew really changes, then maybe someday we'll find out. But respect isn't something you get back by asking for it. It's something you earn by becoming worthy of it. Outside, the lights of Cambridge twinkled like code on a screen. Complex, beautiful, interpretable if you knew how to read it. At 79, I'd finally learned to read the code of my own life. 1 year later, I'm sitting in my home office. David's old workshop converted into a space where I coordinate the Eleanor Foundation, reading emails from seniors across the country who found their voices, their strength, their legal standing. Margaret from Ohio discovered her son had been draining her accounts for gambling debts. Using techniques from our legal advocacy guide, she documented everything and prosecuted successfully. Robert from Texas caught his daughter-in-law forging checks, recorded the confrontation, and sent her to prison. Catherine from Oregon realized her loving children were drugging her to make her appear confused during medical appointments. She's now living independently, and they're facing criminal charges. These aren't stories of helpless elderly people being rescued. These are stories of experienced, intelligent adults who refuse to let anyone, even family, strip away their dignity. The foundation has grown beyond what I ever imagined. We provide legal resources, technology training for evidence gathering, and emotional support for seniors fighting financial abuse. We've helped draft legislation in 12 states. Our smartphone app, Document and Defend, has been downloaded over 200,000 times. But the most important thing we do is change the conversation. For too long, society has treated elder abuse as an inevitable tragedy, something that happens to seniors, not something seniors can actively combat. We're rewriting that narrative. Age brings experience, years of problem solving, decades of accumulated wisdom. These aren't weaknesses to be exploited, they're strengths to be weaponized. Emma, now 17, and planning to study law, volunteers at the foundation every weekend. Grandma, she told me recently, you didn't just save yourself. You showed an entire generation that they don't have to go quietly. If you're watching this and recognizing pieces of your own story, if someone in your family is pushing for what's best for you while pricing your belongings, if concerned relatives want control of your finances, if anyone is treating your age as evidence of incompetence, remember this: your experience is your power. Your wisdom is your weapon. Your dignity is non negotiable. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Seek legal counsel. Build your own support network of people who see you as a person, not an asset. And remember that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. The Eleanor Foundation provides free resources for seniors facing financial abuse. You can find legal guides, technology tutorials, and support networks at eleanorfoundation.org. If you don't have internet access, call our hotline at 1-800-DIGNITY. Share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if these stories of resilience and justice resonate with you. Leave a comment telling us about the older adults in your life who inspire you, or about your own experiences standing up to exploitation. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about one 79-year-old woman who refused to be victimized. This is about a generation that built the modern world, raised families through wars and recessions, and survived decades of challenges that would break younger people. We didn't become weak when we got older. We became dangerous. Real family doesn't hide you away. Real family builds a bigger table. And I finally got my seat back.